Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, not just centuries, but millennia, to a place where the stars blink lazily over mud brick rooftops, and the gentle bleating of sheep echoes off temple walls. The air smells like warm dust and barley mash. You walk barefoot through the fields outside where shadows stretch long across the dry earth, and the flocks shuffle home under watchful eyes. Ancient Mesopotamia, where counting sheep wasn't just a sleepy tradition, but a serious business. You probably wouldn't survive this, by the way. Not the heat, not the math, and certainly not the smell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the farmland, the Tigris River somewhere in the distance, though you can't hear it over the low murmur of sheep. The animals are being herded back for the night, bells softly clinking, dust floating lazily in the golden air. There's something rhythmical about the whole scene, almost hypnotic, one woolly shape after another passing by, swaying slightly, hooves tapping gently against hard-packed earth. 1, 2, 3. Your brain starts to slip into that soft, boggy space between awareness and dreams. A scribe sits on a low stool nearby, stylus in hand, clay tablet on his knees. He's yawning. Counting sheep professionally is more exhausting than you'd think. He squints in the waning light, etching notches into the clay every time a group of 5 stumbles past the enclosure. No Excel sheets. No AI-powered ledgers, just raw clay, a tired wrist, and a lot of patience. The herder beside him mutters something about one missing lamb, though he says it like it happens every night. The lamb always turns up, probably wandered near the barley sacks again. You wonder if they name them. Probably not. It's hard to name what you'll eat or sell next week, but that doesn't stop them from caring. That missing lamb causes a ripple of quiet concern. A boy, maybe 12, barefoot, smeared with dust, runs back toward the field with a torch that crackles as he disappears into the dark. You watch the flickering orange light bob between the tall stalks, then vanish completely. The adults barely flinch. This has happened before. As you lean against a rough stone wall, you notice how quiet the village becomes once the flocks are back in their pens. The bleating turns to occasional murmurs. The people fall into softer tones, and the fires start to glow steadier. Even the dogs flop down with heavy sighs, their job done until morning. And this is just another evening. What you're witnessing, casually and sleepily, is part of one of the oldest logistical systems in human history. These people didn't just count sheep for fun. They had to track everything. Livestock wasn't just dinner. It was currency, offering, workforce, and status symbol. Knowing how many animals came in and out of your gate could mean the difference between taxes owed, gods appeased, or political favor lost. And historians still argue whether Mesopotamian livestock tallies were mostly for religious purposes or simply early bureaucratic obsession. You brush your fingers across the dried mud brick wall, its surface etched faintly with scribbles. There are records here, probably from generations ago. You can't read them, but the repeated patterns suggest they meant something important. Maybe 23 goats, 4 pigs, 1 fine for stealing barley, and still the image of sheep trotting by, sleepy-eyed, starts to lull you. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, a slightly grumpier one, a fluff ball with lopsided ears. It's easy to see how this became the cliché of bedtime rituals. Your brain can't help but assign rhythm to repetition. Every step the animals take becomes a pulse. Every twitch of a tail feels like punctuation in a dream sentence. In the distance, a priest walks the temple steps with slow, deliberate grace. His robes sway slightly, and a small bronze bell dangles from his sash. You don't hear it ring. That's not its job right now. He's watching the sky. His role overlaps with the herders in ways that surprise you. In Mesopotamia, even the stars had their flocks. The god Sin shepherded the moon across the heavens, just as the people tracked their animals across the land. A nice celestial symmetry. Your thoughts drift as the stars begin to prick through the indigo sky, faint and scattered at first. You imagine lying back in the grass, staring upward, counting blinking lights instead of woolly bodies. Same idea, really. A long, repeating pattern that gives your mind just enough to nibble on while the rest of you slowly powers down. A girl walks past you carrying a jar of something. Maybe goat's milk, maybe a fermented barley drink. She doesn't say anything, but nods with quiet recognition. You don't belong here. Not exactly, but you're not unwelcome. After all, everyone's tired. No one questions a visitor who just wants to watch the sheep go by. You notice something odd. The pens are built with channels in between, like little stone moats. Not for water, but for counting. As the animals file through one by one, they're funneled past a narrow passage, and a small child with a stone counter makes a notch for each one. Simple, effective, kind of adorable. You watch him stick his tongue out as he concentrates. 1, 2, 3. People often imagine ancient Mesopotamia as dry and cracked, all solemn temples and solemn priests. But here, now, in this lazy twilight hour, it feels like any small town where the day is ending. You could just as easily be watching cows come home in a sleepy Midwest village. Well, minus the terrifying Ziggurat looming over everything like an angular mountain. There's a soft thud beside you. The boy from earlier, the one who went looking for the missing lamb, has returned dustier, sweatier, but triumphant. Cradled in his arms is a tiny creature, all spindly legs and loud bleats. It looks confused and mildly annoyed, but very much alive. The others cheer softly, the way tired people do when they're relieved, but too sleepy for dramatics. The boy grins, and the scribe scratches in one final mark. The tablet's full now. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it would feel like to live this rhythm every day. To wake up with the roosters, herd with the sun, tally the sheep, and collapse with the stars. Your feet would always be dusty, your fingers ink-stained or clay-smeared, your evenings full of the warm stink of animals and the glow of torches. There's something oddly comforting about it. And just as your thoughts begin to drift too far, you hear the bleating again. Softer now, farther away. The sheep are asleep. Most of the humans are too. Only a few torches burn in the distance, and the sky is now thick with stars, thousands of tiny pinpricks to count if you're still awake. But chances are, you're not. The sheep are still murmuring in the background as your feet shuffle softly through the darkened village. You're not alone. Someone else is up too. A figure leans near a flickering oil lamp, hunched over what looks like a small desk made of smooth stone and crooked wood. You recognize him. It's one of the scribes from earlier, his head now heavy with concentration and the weight of a long day. He's the ancient version of an accountant, minus the coffee, but plus a lot more sheep. His stylus clicks gently against wet clay, each mark deliberate. This is no sleepy doodling. You peek over his shoulder, and there it is, a grid of tidy little wedges, marks that represent flocks, borrowed oxen, and estimated grain yields. This isn't just counting sheep for fun. This is your end-of-day report, your tax ledger, your divine receipt for offerings made. Clay tablets were the spreadsheets of ancient Mesopotamia, and the scribes were the overworked interns of the gods. You step closer. He doesn't look up, too absorbed, but you spot a detail most people wouldn't notice. Small, nearly microscopic tick marks beside the larger symbols. He's double counting, like actually counting the sheep and then counting his counts. No one's getting away with a sneaky extra goat on this man's watch. In Mesopotamia, these tally systems were more than just local bookkeeping. They formed the foundation of civilization's earliest known writing. Cuneiform, the name for these wedge-shaped impressions, evolved largely because people needed to track what they had. Animals, grain, beer, laborers, and, unavoidably, debts. You can almost imagine a sleepy trader one night groaning, "If I have to remember how many sheep I loaned Babu one more time, I'm inventing a writing system." And then he did, probably with a sigh. And here's where it gets quietly hilarious. For all the reverence we have toward ancient writing, it may have started as glorified grocery lists. Historians still argue whether writing evolved out of temple rituals or administrative frustration. But what's certain is that sheep were often involved. A lot of them. The scribe sniffs and shifts his weight, stretching his back. He's maybe 30, but he moves like a man twice that. His hands are calloused, fingers thick. You can tell he doesn't just write. He probably hurts when needed, maybe even collects offerings. This was a job of many hats. He nudges a nearby bowl of what looks like date mash with his foot, but doesn't stop writing. A multitasker. Or maybe just hungry. Beside him, a stack of tablets is drying in the warm air, hardening into stone like permanence. You tilt one slightly and catch a glimpse of a curious symbol: 3 sheep, a reed bundle, and something that looks like a smiling fish. Could be a transaction. Could be a very bad joke. No one really knows. But it's delightful to imagine a world where a sheep joke gets fossilized in clay for 5,000 years. Some of these tablets were designed to be temporary, meant to be wiped clean and reused. Others, especially those stored in temple archives, were permanent records, tucked away in clay jars and mud brick shells for future generations to decipher, or misinterpret, or mispronounce. You know how people are. You glance up at the sky. The stars haven't moved much. It's only been an hour, maybe 2. But the mood has shifted. The village is quieter. Even the dogs aren't pacing anymore. The kind of stillness that only comes after long repetition. A people who have counted the same sheep, walked the same path, and scribbled the same symbols for centuries. The idea that math and record keeping could be soothing might sound strange, but not here. Here, it's ritual. Every wedge pressed into clay is a moment of control in a chaotic world. Every number is a declaration. I know what I have. I know what I owe. I've done my part. Your eyelids feel heavier now. The air has cooled. The last of the fires die down. You think back to modern times. How we still track things obsessively. Sleep cycles, steps walked, calories eaten. We haven't changed much, really. Just swapped clay tablets for glowing rectangles. Another figure appears beside the scribe, a young woman this time, holding a bundle of reeds. She sits without speaking, handing him a fresh stylus. They work side by side in total silence. 2 night owls surrounded by the distant shuffle of sleeping animals. Occasionally, he murmurs a number. She nods, writes it down on a separate tablet. A backup. A cross-check. A secret note about how many sheep Babu still owes. Nobody knows. That's the charm. You let your gaze wander again. The pens are mostly quiet, but a few sheep wander near the edge, their fluffy outlines barely visible against the darker earth. You find yourself counting without meaning to. 1, 2. That one has a wonky horn. 3, 4. The counting pulls you inward, softens your thoughts. The numbers aren't rigid. They sway like the sheep themselves, gentle and curved, unbothered. And here's a quirky little detail you might not expect. Not all ancient sheep were counted equally. Lambs had different symbols. Castrated rams had their own mark. Sick or injured animals, another set. And then there were phantom sheep, animals promised but never delivered, like IOUs for woolly currency. Imagine being haunted in your dreams by a sheep you owe someone. An ancient Mesopotamian nightmare. You wonder if the scribes ever got bored, or if they ever messed with the symbols, gave a sheep a mustache, drew an extra ear, snuck in a doodle of a temple guard slipping on dung. It's nice to imagine ancient professionalism with just a dash of middle school energy. Some scholars believe that even back then, there were moments when counting became meditative, almost spiritual. The repetition, the symmetry, the slow rhythm of pressing stylus to clay. It's not that different from a breathing exercise or a mantra. 1 sheep, 2 sheep. Breathe in, breathe out. The woman beside the scribe yawns, stretches, then begins to pack away their tools into a clay jar sealed with a cloth lid. She nods to you. Again, you're not part of this world, but you're tolerated. Maybe because you're quiet, maybe because they know everyone's just trying to make it through the night. Numbers in order. Sheep accounted for. The scribe stands, his knees popping loudly, and picks up one of the tablets. He carries it to a nearby platform and places it gently on a pile, smoothing its surface with reverence. He steps back, exhales, and finally allows himself a full-bodied stretch. You follow him with your eyes as he disappears down a small alley. Not to sleep just yet. Probably another tablet to check, or a torch to extinguish, or a late-night sheep complaint from a very tired priest. And you? You stay there a moment longer, feeling the warm clay under your fingers, the scent of reeds and earth in your nostrils. You look up at the stars. You try to count them, but they shift just enough to confuse you. Or maybe that's your brain, already drifting. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 1 wedge, 2 marks. The ancient scribes might be gone, but their quiet counting still echoes through your thoughts, slow and steady, like a lullaby pressed into clay. Your steps slow as you drift away from the tablet station, each footfall lighter now, like your body's forgotten how to be heavy. You follow a worn dirt path that winds between squat mud brick homes, past pens where sheep snore like living throw pillows, and toward a low wall that edges the grain yard. It's quiet enough to hear your own breath, and the rustle of distant reeds swaying gently in the midnight breeze. At the edge of the yard, a broad-shouldered man is kneeling by a basket. He's counting, of course. Not sheep this time. Something round and rough, with a husk that crackles under his touch. Barley. He scoops the grains with a shallow wooden dish, muttering softly, then tips the measure into a jar. Another tally, another moment of control. You resist the urge to help. Not because it's difficult, but because there's something oddly sacred about it. Like watching a monk fold paper cranes. Barley wasn't just food, it was currency. In fact, in many parts of ancient Mesopotamia, wages were paid in barley rations. Beer was brewed from it. Temples taxed it. Farmers feared for it during floods, and kings hoarded it in granaries. It's humbling, really. Your ancestors may have built pyramids and ziggurats, but they were still obsessed with grain prices. Just like today, only now we call it Wall Street and get push notifications instead of counting scoops. The man mutters a number, frowns, and starts over. You get the sense this isn't just about precision, it's rhythm. Scoop, count, pour. Scoop, count, pour. Almost musical. And now your mind is starting to drift in time with the pattern. A primitive lullaby made of barley and dust. Historians still argue whether these early metering rituals were designed solely for economic reasons or if they had a ceremonial edge to them, especially at night, when counting seemed to take on a more reverent tone. Some clay tablets even mention offerings of measured grain beneath the stars, which sounds poetic until you realize it probably involved standing in the cold, ankle-deep in dust, swatting mosquitoes. Nearby, a young boy sits cross-legged with a heap of dried reeds, practicing his own version of math. He's bending the reeds into bundles, some tight, others loose, stacking them by size. He's not being told to do this. He's just doing it. Maybe he's mimicking his father. Or maybe, deep in his bones, he understands that in this world, numbers matter. If you can count, you belong. If you can keep up with the barley guy or impress a scribe, you've got a future. And here's a little tidbit that makes you smile. Some of the earliest Mesopotamian schools were called tablet houses, and they trained boys, only boys, of course, to become scribes by making them write the same things over and over. One popular exercise: counting sheep. The phrase, "one sheep goes out," one sheep comes in, shows up on countless school tablets, like an ancient version of lines on a chalkboard. You can almost hear the students groaning as they write it for the 50th time, all while dreaming of literally any other profession. But not all of them hated it. Some likely found the act meditative, soothing, even. You get it. As you stand there watching grains slip like sand into the jar, you feel it too. The way repetition silences the mind. The way it lets sleep sneak up on you, unnoticed. A breeze stirs the edge of the field, and you turn to see something that stops you for a moment. A tall wooden pole crowned with a cluster of feathers and bones. A totem of sorts. You edge closer and realize it's a marker for a boundary, maybe spiritual, maybe bureaucratic. It's hard to tell where religion ends and accounting begins in this place. Beneath the totem lies another offering, a tiny clay bowl, cracked and empty save for a few stray barley kernels and a pinch of some dried herb. Mint, maybe? Or whatever passed for mint when cuneiform was cutting edge. This isn't just a fence. It's a checkpoint for the gods. A whispered hope that the grain will grow, the sheep will stay put, and no one will mess up the ledgers. You rest a hand on the pole and feel its texture, rough, fibrous, sun-bleached. You imagine the dozens of hands that have touched it before you, each with the same simple hope. Let this be enough. Let my count match the gods' count. The barley man stands, stretches, and nods toward the little boy. They leave together, their shadows stretching long and quiet behind them. You stay behind for a moment, letting the silence wrap around you. There's something deeply human about what you've witnessed tonight. Not the grand temples or the high priests. Just this, measuring, counting, repeating, trying to impose a little order on a universe that's never really cooperated. And here's a fringe fact that makes you chuckle. Some scholars believe ancient Mesopotamians even used sheep livers for divination, not just sacrificing the sheep, but inspecting its liver for omens. There were entire manuals written on which squiggles in a sheep's liver meant good harvests or certain doom. Imagine someone reading your future in your pancreas. Hard pass. You shake off the image. Your brain is drifting again. The counting continues, even without you. The barley, the sheep, the scribes with their silent styluses. They don't need you to keep going, but you're grateful to be here all the same. Like a quiet observer at a symphony played entirely in breath and footsteps. The stars are brighter now. You notice one flickering just above the horizon, probably a planet, but no one here knows that. To them, it's a divine eye. Maybe Nisaba, the goddess of writing, watching over her night shift accountants. Maybe it's just sleepy Jupiter, blinking slowly, wondering why everyone's so obsessed with inventory. Your own thoughts are slowing down. The barley scoop is still in your mind. That rhythmic motion. Scoop, count, pour. You're not even trying to sleep, but your body is already responding to the pace. You imagine what it would be like to fall asleep holding a stylus, your cheek resting against soft clay, dreaming of sheep that never run, only walk gently through your mind in single file. 1 barley scoop, 2 barley scoops, 1 sheep nibbling mint leaves, another one sneezing because the mint was actually wild onion. You're smiling now, and just when you think this couldn't get more repetitive, you spot a third figure arriving in the yard carrying, yes, another basket. More barley. Of course. You sigh. You'd offer to help, but frankly, it looks like they've got it covered. And honestly, your hands are too heavy now. The counting will go on, with or without you. And that's strangely comforting. You blink slowly, still leaning near the edge of the grain yard, watching the third barley carrier begin his methodical routine. It's almost hypnotic, like watching waves roll onto a shore that's never seen water. Scoop, pour, smooth count. Again and again. You don't interrupt. You barely breathe. Because somehow, this is the kind of repetition that makes your bones feel heavy in the best possible way. You turn away and begin ambling back through the narrow footpaths. The air smells faintly of straw, faintly of sheep, and, oddly, of sweet bread. Somewhere nearby, someone's baking, even in the middle of the night. Because in a city like this, one ruled by sun, flood, and tax collectors, someone always has to be awake. Even if it's just to prepare dough for the morning. You pass under a low arch and find yourself in a darker quarter, quieter still. This is where the livestock live, chickens, goats, and of course, the sheep. You hear them first. That soft, irregular baa, like they're too tired to complain properly. The pens are made of wicker and mud, each enclosure more or less the size of a bedroom, though you suspect the sheep have better rent agreements. And now, standing at the edge of the largest pen, you spot something curious. A man perched on a three-legged stool, eyes half shut, stylus in hand. He's facing the animals, and you're not sure if he's counting them or just watching them dream. You approach gently, not wanting to startle the sheep or the scribe. Turns out he is counting, whispering numbers to himself, scratching them on a clay tablet balanced on his knee. 1, 2, 3, up to maybe 30, maybe more. You lose track around 15. Not because the sheep move too fast, they don't, but because your brain has already started slipping into that soft haze again, that ancient, sheep-fueled stupor. Historians still argue whether these livestock night counts were practical or symbolic. Did they serve as actual census data? Were they religious acts tied to some lunar rhythm? Or was it more bureaucratic than that? A temple record-keeping tradition that just got really, really persistent. One thing's certain. Counting sheep wasn't a metaphor back then. It was a job. And now, a quirky nugget. Early Mesopotamians believed that each sheep had a destiny assigned by the gods, its own tiny fate etched invisibly into the wool. There were prayers recited during shearing, whispers said before slaughter, and special rituals for the first lamb of the season. You're staring at one particularly fluffy Ewe right now and wondering what destiny hers might be. Hopefully not stew. The man on the stool looks up briefly and gives you a sleepy nod. He doesn't stop counting. You don't interrupt. There's a quiet understanding in this place. Distractions are rare, and even curiosity has manners. Instead, you sit down nearby, leaning against the rough wall of the pen, just watching. The sheep move slowly, dreamily, a few of them chewing invisible cud. Others sway slightly, like toddlers too stubborn to lie down. One sheep nudges another, and that one gently flops over. The ripple effect is glorious. Now 2 others are lying down, one curled nose to tail like a woolly cinnamon roll. You try not to laugh out loud. There's a soft clicking sound. The scribe is adjusting his tablet, flipping to the other side like a kid reaching the end of a notebook page. You catch a glimpse of the marks, small wedge-shaped impressions grouped in clever little clusters. The Mesopotamian number system wasn't base 10 like ours. It was base 60. That's right, counting by 60s. Why? Well, historians still argue that too. Some say it's because 60 is so easily divisible. Others blame Babylonian astronomers. Either way, it's not beginner math. You wonder how the scribe keeps it all straight without a calculator or even a decent pencil. Just a pointed reed and a steady hand. You respect the hustle. And now you're wondering if maybe that's what the sheep are doing too, lying there, watching him count, hoping they don't get skipped. After all, if no one records you, did you even sheep? The moon creeps higher, casting long silvery shadows through the slats of the pen. You notice how some sheep are sleeping standing up. Others are spooning like a cuddle pile made of clouds. One has managed to rest its head on a trough and looks so impossibly comfortable you want to applaud. And here's a detail that slips in like a lullaby. Mesopotamian shepherds used to carve tiny charms out of bone or ivory, little amulets they wore around their necks to keep the flocks safe. One charm might depict a curled ram. Another might have cuneiform symbols for protection, or perhaps the name of a god like Dumuzi, the shepherd deity. You wonder if the man on the stool wears one under his robe. Or maybe he's too experienced to need luck anymore. You tilt your head back and stare at the stars again. That same low, hanging one from earlier still blinks, now joined by a wisp of cloud. There's something oddly reassuring about it, like it's checking in on your progress. Your own thoughts are getting fuzzy now. It's hard to remember how long you've been here. The barley, the scribes, the sheep, each new scene folding gently into the last, like a soft cotton sheet being laid over your mind. Even your muscles seem to be working at half speed. Another sheep lies down. Another stylus mark is made. You realize you're counting along without meaning to. 23, 24, 25. You blink slowly. There's no rush. The sheep aren't going anywhere. And you're starting to think that's kind of the point. You stay seated for a while longer, nestled beside the sheep pen. There's a certain rhythm to it all now, like the world has slipped into a heartbeat slower than yours. The scribe scratches another mark onto the tablet, and a cool breeze stirs the wool on a nearby lamb. It twitches one ear, then returns to the art of being gloriously asleep. Eventually, you rise again, careful not to startle the sheep or the man with the stylus. You nod your thanks, though you're not sure for what exactly. The moment, maybe, or the atmosphere, or the fact that you're somehow still awake, but barely. You turn a corner and find yourself in a different part of the complex. These mud brick walls are taller, reinforced with timber beams, and little tufts of thatch poking out like surprised eyebrows. A set of narrow steps leads you upward, not quite a tower, but enough to offer a raised view. And that's when you spot it. A granary. No, not just a granary. The granary. This is the central food storage hub for the entire temple complex, and it's enormous. The building's wide as a soccer field and segmented into chambers that look like oversized beehives, each one used to store a specific kind of grain, seed, or legume. Chickpeas here, flax there, barley everywhere. You descend again, drifting toward the nearest chamber. A worker is hauling a basket on their back, half full of some pale, dusty grain. They nod as you pass, too focused to chat. You peek into one of the chambers and catch a whiff of that nutty, earthy scent that only bulk food storage has. It's oddly comforting. It smells like preparation, like someone, somewhere, is thinking ahead. And that's when you hear it again. Counting. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the faint murmur of numerals, softly spoken, accompanied by the tap of a stylus against clay. Another tablet. Another ledger. Another weary Mesopotamian, marking the world into units. See, here's the thing about ancient Mesopotamia. It ran on two fuels, irrigation water and math. Without both, the whole system falls apart. Cities like and Lagish weren't just collections of people. They were numbers, measured in rations, work hours, and tax obligations. You weren't just a farmer. You were assigned a set amount of workdays based on your class, your gender, your livestock, and, if the gods were having a weird week, possibly the phase of the moon. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian bureaucracy was impressively modern or aggressively unnecessary. On one hand, they had receipts for fish sauce. On the other hand, it sometimes took 3 clay tablets and a temple priest just to request a new pair of sandals. You peer over the shoulder of this granary clerk, who doesn't seem to mind. Their tablet is larger than the last one, more space for numbers. And not just sheep this time. There are symbols for wheat, sesame, lentils, even onions. You can tell they've been counting for a while. The stylus is worn to a nub, and their fingers are stained with clay dust. Nearby, a second worker pours grain from one container to another. You notice they pause, count 5 scoops, then stop. The 6th scoop? It goes somewhere else, into a smaller jar, labeled in cuneiform. A tax jar. Yup. Even in 2400 BC, you couldn't escape the taxman. But instead of W-2 forms and digital invoices, it was 1 scoop out of every 6 goes to the temple. Fair? Maybe. Annoying? Definitely. You lean on the doorway, listening to the gentle cascade of grain, the soft footfalls, the whispered numerals. If this were music, it would be the world's slowest lullaby. And oddly, you're kind of into it. Here's a fringe tidbit to file away while you breathe in that grainy air. Some temples had dedicated dream interpreters on staff. Yes, actual professionals who would listen to your dreams and decode them. Nightmares too, especially the sheep-related ones. A sheep missing an ear in your dream? Probably a sign. A sheep turning into your neighbor? Definitely a lawsuit waiting to happen. You move deeper into the granary, where it's cooler. The thick mud brick walls block out the heat, and for a moment you forget it's nighttime. The lighting is always dim here, just oil lamps flickering like sleepy fireflies in clay bowls. The flames pop occasionally, sending tiny shadows skittering across the curved walls. And that's when you see her. A young girl, no older than 12, sitting cross-legged near a stack of baskets, humming softly. She has a counting board in front of her, little carved pebbles arranged in neat rows. You recognize it from those museum labels you never finish reading. It's abacus-adjacent device used for training young scribes. You lean closer. She doesn't stop humming, doesn't look up, just keeps sliding the pebbles from left to right, pausing at intervals to rearrange. Her lips move silently, like she's doing math in her head. You try not to disrupt her rhythm, and just as your own thoughts begin to float away again, she whispers, 57, then resets the board. Again, you wonder how many hours she's been here, how many boards she's filled, whether she dreams in numbers yet, whether she counts sheep in her sleep, or if she's already moved on to oxen and figs and jars of honey. You sit beside her, and she slides a pebble your way. Invitation or test? Hard to tell. You push it back. She smiles, just a little. Later, as you drift out of the granary, your eyes adjusting to the starlight again, you realize something quietly absurd. In a world without digital clocks or calendars, without Wi-Fi or whiteboards, or even proper windows, these people still manage to build an entire civilization just by counting. Counting sheep, counting grain, counting on each other, maybe. You trail your fingers along the rough edge of the outer wall. Somewhere in some chamber, another clerk whispers 84. Somewhere else, a lamb curls against its mother. And overhead, the stars blink lazily, unbothered by the weight of numbers below. You don't look back. You just breathe in, soft and steady, and start counting again. You follow a narrow path out of the granary, feet padding silently over packed earth, still warm from the day's sun. The night has cooled, but only slightly, like the world is exhaling slowly through its nose. You hear sandals flapping in the distance, a lazy torch being carried by a temple guard, or maybe a priest who forgot where he left his favorite beer jug. Your own journey now drifts sideways, away from grain and sheep and towards something a little more abstract, clay and thought. Because while food made the cities grow, it was writing that let them remember. And here, Nestled beside the temple courtyard sits one of Mesopotamia's most underestimated marvels, the scribe school. Yes, school. You didn't think you'd get out of that, did you? You duck beneath a low lintel and step into a rectangular room that smells like chalk, wet clay, and frustrated ambition. Rows of boys, only boys, unfortunately, sit cross-legged with wooden boards balanced on their knees. Each has a chunk of clay and a reed stylus. Some are furiously poking at the tablet. Others are just staring into the void. You know the look. Math face. A teacher with a beard like a storm cloud looms near the front, occasionally grumbling things like, "That's not a 7," or "That's not anything." You get the sense this man has dreamed of quitting for decades. Welcome to the Adaba, the house of tablets. The flickering oil lamps throw long shadows over the walls, where earlier students have scratched practice symbols, numbers, names of kings, and something that might be a doodle of a goat with overly ambitious biceps. You settle into a corner, just another ghost of a student. No one notices you, not even the boy near you who keeps whispering, 34, 35, 36, as if the numbers will build themselves if he just chants them enough times. Historians still argue whether this schooling system was the domain of a privileged elite, or if temple scribes occasionally picked promising commoners. What's clear is that becoming a scribe meant securing a future, maybe even one with regular rations and a life away from the mud-drenched fields. And what were they learning to write? Oh, just the foundational elements of math and administration in Sumerian, a language that was already ancient in ancient times. Numbers came first. Lists of livestock, counts of bricks, quantities of beer. What a thrilling syllabus. Your eyes trail across the floor to a pile of discarded clay tablets. Today's failed homework. Some are smashed. Others were clearly just dropped in despair. You imagine the Mesopotamian version of "I'm never gonna use this" in real life, echoing through the ages. Still, there's something soothing in the repetition. One boy's tablet reads, 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep, 4 sheep, over and over. His stylus barely lifts between lines. His head bobs, half asleep. Honestly, you're not far behind him. A mainstream fact slides into your mind as if whispered by the walls. The Mesopotamians were among the first to use a positional number system. Not quite base 10, not base 12 either. It was sexagesimal, base 60. Because apparently, math wasn't hard enough already. You gaze at one young student who's paused mid-symbol, his stylus dangling from slack fingers. Is he asleep? Daydreaming? Or maybe his brain has just fled the building. You watch his chest rise and fall slowly, and realize this is the moment all learning becomes the same, whether it's algebra or sheep enumeration. The great fade out. The surrender to tiredness. You slip back outside before anyone can ask you to recite the multiplication table for 13. The stars are a little brighter now. The moon hangs low, like it's trying to spy on someone's secret barley stash. You head toward another building, this one quieter, older, wrapped in vines, and the soft hum of cicadas. Inside, it's cooler. This is the archive room. Clay tablets line wooden shelves, stacked like flat bread loaves. Each is labeled in its own way, usually the date, the contents, and the name of whoever wrote it. Some tablets even have wax seals with thumbprints, like ancient sticky notes with biometric security. This is the brain of the city. Here lies everything from sheep counts to royal edicts to tax records to, yes, complaints from neighbors about someone stealing their well water during a drought. Humans never change. You reach out and brush your fingers over one tablet, its surface scored with little wedge-shaped marks. Cuneiform. You try to follow the lines. 5 sheep, 9 goats, 2 oxen, 1 worker, absent. What happened to the worker? Did he run away? Fall ill? Oversleep and miss a meeting with destiny? You find another tablet. This one's oddly poetic. The sheep passed before the god. Their number was good. The offering accepted. The air warm. The god pleased. A mix of census and spiritual Yelp review. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In one famous tablet, a scribe complained that his teacher made him write the same passage 10 times, again and again, like a fool with nothing better to do. That passage still exists. Somewhere in this very room. You smile in solidarity. We've all had that teacher. You rest on a stool, nestled between 2 shelves. The room smells of dust, aged clay, and oil smoke, and peace. You could stay here forever. But then, from the far side, you hear the tiniest of rustles. Someone else is here. You tiptoe closer, weaving between shelves. It's a man, middle-aged, robes a little rumpled, reclining on a mat with a stack of tablets beside him. He's muttering softly. 7 sheep, 5 jars, 1 wagon axle too, and then yawns. Is he auditing? Dream practicing? Actually working? Whatever it is, you don't disturb him. You sit a few paces away and try to mimic his voice in your mind. 7 sheep. The syllables stretch into your thoughts like warm molasses. 5 jars. You imagine clay containers, each marked with a symbol, stacked neatly under a star-filled sky. 1 wagon axle. A creaky wooden wheel turns slowly in the darkness. Then silence. You almost don't notice your own breath slowing, matching the tempo of those soft numbers. The walls around you don't feel like walls anymore. They feel like a cradle. The air doesn't move so much as wrap itself gently around your shoulders. No one comes to wake the archivist. No one notices your presence. The city breathes on without you, gently, rhythmically, always counting. And here, under stone and starlight, you understand something ancient and true. To count is to care, to remember, to keep, even if all you're counting are sheep. The cool hush of the archive clings to you like a second skin as you ease out into the warm Mesopotamian night again. For a moment, you just stand there, blinking slowly, letting your breath fall in line with the distant sounds of reed flutes and the low murmur of night watchers chatting about anything but sheep, probably bread, or the heat, or how loud their neighbor's goat is. But your walk resumes, slow and dreamlike, until your sandals squelch into something sticky. You look down. Oh no, it's the tannery. Yeah, sorry about that. No ancient city was complete without a corner that smelled like socks left in a wet cave, dipped in vinegar, and then left in the sun for a bonus round of fermentation. You try not to breathe too deeply. Past the tannery, your feet find drier ground. And there, like a quiet heartbeat pulsing in the dark, lies another ritual of Mesopotamian life. One less grimy, more mathematical. It's time to follow a shepherd. By day, he's just a blur on the horizon. One man and his sheep bouncing against the skyline like fuzzy popcorn. But now, at night, he's a living ledger. Each animal, each step, each shift in the wind. It's all observed, calculated, remembered. Because unlike you, the sheep don't know how to count themselves. So you walk beside him, even if he can't see you. His feet crunch across gravel. His hand runs over his reed staff, worn smooth by years of worry. And he's muttering softly, just loud enough for the animals to hear. 1, 2, 3, 4. You've seen shepherds count like this before. Not with fingers, with pebbles. One small stone per animal, dropped into a pouch or onto a flat plate. The word abacus might be centuries away, but the thinking is already there. Here's your mainstream fact for the night. The Mesopotamians invented one of the earliest accounting systems in the world. Tokens, clay envelopes, and marks on tablets. They were all ways to keep track of assets. And yes, those assets included sheep. So many sheep. The shepherd crouches, adjusts the boundary stones of his pen, then tosses a smooth black pebble into a carved bowl. One sheep passes through, another pebble, another sheep. The process is hypnotic. Back before proper writing, shepherds used small-shaped tokens to represent quantities, cones for grain, spears for animals, discs for services. When they needed to prove a transaction, they'd seal the tokens inside a clay envelope called a bulla. You couldn't open it without breaking the seal, an ancient form of anti-fraud tech. It's oddly impressive. You sidestep a goat nibbling your tunic and notice a half-buried token in the dirt, round, with faint notches. Probably a leftover from an argument over whose sheep ate whose barley. Of course, historians still argue whether these tokens were used more for tax records or local barter. Some say they were strictly religious. Others claim they were just advanced IOUs. But one thing's clear: numbers mattered, even when no one quite understood them yet. The shepherd shifts again, now whispering, 17, 18, 19. It's not just for his sake, it's for the gods. Every sheep accounted for means fewer divine penalties, fewer curses, fewer plagues of, say, rebellious lambs refusing to be sheared. There's a fringe story, probably exaggerated, that a priest once tried to fudge the numbers on a sheep tithe, and his temple mysteriously flooded that same week. Coincidence? The other priests didn't think so. From then on, everyone double counted, even the cows. As you crouch beside the shepherd's pen, you hear the creak of wood, the snort of a sleepy ram, and the sudden rustle of a lizard slipping through the straw. Every sound is a number now, or a distraction from one. You can't help but marvel at the shepherd's quiet focus. No calculator, no spreadsheet, just memory, stones, and instinct. He knows every sheep by its gait, its noise, even the way it chews. You can barely remember where you left your water bottle this morning. The bowl is nearly full of pebbles. 37 sheep, all safe. He exhales, long and low. You feel it in your own lungs. Something about the rhythm of it all begins to tug at your eyelids. Maybe counting sheep is magic after all. But then the shepherd starts a second round, this time to account for their condition. Limping? Missing ear tags? Pregnant? He hums as he checks each one, maybe a tune passed down from his grandmother's grandmother. You walk slowly among the flock, trying not to disturb their grazing dreams. Some of the younger lambs are curled into impossible pretzel shapes, twitching softly as they chase invisible butterflies in sleep. You pass a particularly fluffy one that lets out a sigh like an old merchant after a big meal. You smile. You get it. A quirky tidbit floats up here. Some clay tablets include phrases like, "The sheep are too small to sacrifice," or "This one bites." Literal ancient performance reviews. Imagine being a priest and getting a note that says Ramesh 12 refuses to cooperate. The shepherd finishes his second check, sits down, and finally closes his eyes. You sit too, the sound of sheep breathing around you like a fuzzy metronome. Inhale, exhale, one bleat, two snores, three rustles, four more breaths. The stars above flicker like ancient numbers written across the sky. Someone, somewhere, is probably trying to read them, but not you. You're too far gone into this gentle, ancient loop of breath and counting and sleep. You don't remember standing up, but now you're walking again. The shepherd's murmurs have faded behind you, swallowed by the stillness of pre-dawn. A faint blush touches the eastern horizon. The sky is that soft indigo gray that whispers, "Soon," while still granting you a little more night. You're headed toward the edge of the city now, past low brick walls and the occasional spindly tree stretching upward like it's trying to tap the moon for one last bit of light. And what do you find nestled on the fringe of urban life? A field, of course, but not just any field. This one is etched with furrows, lined with narrow irrigation ditches, and buzzing faintly with the most ancient sound of all, complaints from farmers. You shuffle past two men arguing about the yield of their barley. One gestures wildly toward a half-filled basket. The other just shrugs like, "Well, what did you expect? The moon was wrong this month." You slow your pace and breathe in the earthy scent of tilled soil, ancient fertilizer, and, oh, is that fish? Yes, that's definitely fish. Fertilizer in Mesopotamia came from a creative menu of leftovers. You learn not to inhale too deeply. Anyway, tonight, we're farming with numbers. See, this field is more than dirt. It's a ledger. Each row, a unit. Each plot, a gamble. You bend down and run your fingers through the furrows. Warm soil clings to your skin, like a history textbook you can actually touch. Here's your mainstream fact. The Mesopotamians developed one of the earliest systems of metrology. That's fancy speak for measurement. They had units for length cus, area sar, volume gur, and more, all vital for agriculture, trade, and taxes. If you couldn't measure it, you couldn't tax it, and heaven forbid anyone try to dodge a temple tithe. That's where the scribes came in. Picture a slightly annoyed intern with a stylus. He'd come out to the fields, crouch beside a farmer, and start scribbling figures on a clay tablet. Rain or shine. Scribes didn't get sick days. The units weren't decimal. No, Mesopotamians loved base 60. 60. You wonder why, and historians still argue whether it was convenience, astronomy, or just collective masochism. But the result? A maddeningly precise, beautifully complex way of tracking everything from land use to, yes, how many sheep were allowed to trample your wheat. You step aside as a younger farmer walks past with a reed basket on his head, muttering a prayer to Ningirsu, the god of agriculture. It sounds like, "Please let this count. Please let this count." And that's not just about harvests. Counting wasn't optional. In a society where temples owned land, and land produced grain, and grain paid priests, the numbers were sacred. Lose count, and it wasn't just your boss you disappointed, it was the divine. There's a worn stone marker near your feet. A cubit stick leans beside it. The farmer will stretch a cord between two such posts to measure plots, record yields, and argue with neighbors about property lines. Yes, ancient zoning drama. It existed. A quirky tidbit. There's an old clay tablet listing a boundary dispute between two barley farmers. Apparently, one of them kept moving his marker stone every night. The solution? A priest watched it overnight and caught him in the act. Nothing like divine babysitting. As you stroll down the edge of the field, fireflies wink in and out like flickering digits, ones and zeros from the dawn of data. Each glow could represent a grain tax, or a missed sheep tally, or the price of a jug of beer. It's a pastoral spreadsheet, except the cows sometimes walk across it and mess up the formatting. You pause near a pile of clay tablets, likely left by a scribe who needed a lunch break or had an emergency existential crisis. The top tablet has a faint scrawl. "I measured." He lied. You chuckle softly. Passive-aggressive accounting has a long pedigree. Off in the distance, a man sings a harvest chant. The rhythm is slow, melodic, almost hypnotic. You catch a word or two, something about barley, time, and debt. The tempo is steady, like a metronome helping him pace his labor. You wonder if the song includes tally marks, or if the singer just knows the number of steps by feel. You'd think this all would be terribly dull. Dirt, numbers, more dirt. But there's something soothing in the ritual. Something calming about the way it all loops. Seed, soil, count, weigh, grow, harvest, count again. The farmers sharpen sticks to trace rows, straighten their reed cords, and argue over whose field grew more weeds. It's slow drama, agricultural soap opera, and yet, somehow, they sleep soundly. Why? Because they've counted everything. The sheep, the rows, the gods watching from their ziggurat perches. It's all measured, tallied, filed, literally and cosmically. That's the magic, isn't it? When everything is known, sleep comes easier. When the field is balanced, the sheep are safe, the scribe has signed off, and the temple gets its grain. The day can end without worry. The fireflies are fewer now. The sky's getting lighter. A farmer near you stretches, yawns, and gently pats the head of a barley sheaf like it's a sleeping child. "Rest now," he says. "You've been good this year." You think he means the field, but maybe he means the numbers. Maybe they've behaved for once. And you? You're getting sleepy too. It's the rhythm, the counting, the hum of a civilization that believes every grain matters. That sleep is the reward for balance, for math. And it's not over yet. You're still walking. Well, more like gliding now, through a city that's beginning to blink itself awake. You slip past vendors arranging baskets, goats that look only mildly interested in existing, and one elderly woman using a broom with more anger than efficiency. The streets of Uruk, or maybe it's don't rush. They stretch and yawn and invite the sun with all the urgency of a camel in a hammock. And you're headed somewhere quieter, somewhere where the numbers get serious. The temple, not the flashy outer courtyard with its bustle and sacrificial chickens. No, you're sneaking around back to the temple records room. It smells like clay dust and old ambition. There's a scribe sitting cross-legged, humming tunelessly while poking at a cracked tablet. His stylus taps like a ticking clock, counting off units of grain, sheep, dates, silver, and probably boredom. See, this is where Mesopotamia's real magic happens. Behind every transaction, every counted sheep, every tax in kind, there's a guy with good handwriting and chronic back pain. You crouch beside him. He doesn't notice you, which is good. Ghosting through time tends to freak people out. Let's hit our mainstream fact first. Mesopotamians invented writing primarily for accounting. That's right. Not poetry, not philosophy, just keeping track of stuff. The earliest writing was cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks on clay. And it didn't say, "I love you." It said, "Two goats, not yours. Pay up." This room holds economic truths layered thicker than temple incense. Tablets catalog barley rations for temple workers, sheep owed in tribute, debt repayments, even beer allowances. The scribes weren't just number crunchers. They were the glue of the system. They had job titles, hierarchies, and sometimes even a little sass. One tablet has a note that reads, "Scribe Eridu refuses to share reed stylus." Again, bureaucracy, eternal and petty. You run your fingers over a freshly baked tablet, still warm. The marks are so tidy, so deliberate, and yet, sometimes they lie. That's your quirky tidbit. Clay forgery was real. Some clever types would re-wet tablets and fudge the numbers. No, High Priestess, I definitely owed you fewer sheep last month. Historians still argue whether these altered tablets were ever widely successful, but several show clear signs of tampering, wet over dry markings, inconsistent handwriting, suspicious math. And oh, the math. We've mentioned base 60, but here you see it at work. 1 gur of barley, 60 kwa to a gur. Each kwa measured out with little ceramic scoops like ancient cereal bowls. You wonder how many sleepless scribes had nightmares about conversions. They even had proto-receipts. You hand someone a goat, they give you a clay token. You redeem that token later for proof. Eventually, the tokens got stored in clay envelopes, fully, with impressions pressed on the outside. That's right, the world's first accounting envelopes. Somewhere, an ancient accountant grinned with smug satisfaction. Out the window, a rooster crows. One of the scribes looks up, curses under his breath, and goes right back to tallying. Sunlight slants into the room now, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny decimal points. The temples weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic hubs. Storage houses, tax offices, labor deployment headquarters. If you wanted to move barley across town or borrow oxen, you went through the temple. You sneak a peek at a big stone tablet mounted on the wall. It lists monthly temple allocations. There's a section labeled sleep offerings. You pause. Could that mean? No, turns out it's just a poetic way of referring to dream interpretation rituals. Still, you smile at the irony. What about debt? Oh, that was everywhere. People borrowed grain in the spring, paid it back after harvest. Interest rates were steep, often 33% on grain, 20% on silver. You wonder how many dreams were disturbed by that math. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian debt was more predatory or community-driven, but it definitely kept the scribes busy. You drift toward a corner where two young apprentices are playing a counting game with pebbles. One arranges them in rows of 6, the other in little pyramids. Their teacher sighs and reminds them, always line up your units. Don't confuse qua with sila. You don't know what a sila is, but you nod like you do. Back outside, the city is humming now. Not loud, not chaotic, just the soft thrum of routine. Bakers pounding dough. Women sweeping dust off dust. A dog yawns so hard, nearly flips over. And you walk through it all, watching the math flow beneath everything like an invisible current. The scribes' work, dull as it seemed, held Mesopotamia together. Not the kings, not the priests, not even the gods. Just one person, hunched over a tablet, whispering numbers into clay. You pass a shop with a painted sign. Reeds sharpened here. Even scribes needed a support economy. The shopkeeper looks half asleep, eyelids drooping as he slices a reed into shape. It's peaceful, comforting even, knowing that someone, somewhere, is counting what matters. That someone's watching the ledgers, balancing the yields, making sure nobody's sheep get lost in the margins. You turn a corner and find a little girl scratching numbers into dust with a stick. She's copying her father's ledger. Practice. Her counting is rhythmic, calming. You listen. 1, 2, 3, and suddenly you're counting 2. Not sheep, not qua, just the seconds of breath, the rhythm of ancient hands pressing marks into clay, the soft whisper of calculation echoing down time. You wonder if maybe, just maybe, that's where counting sheep comes from. Not the animals themselves, but the rhythm, the comfort of measured repetition, the knowledge that if someone was counting, everything would be okay, even sleep. The sun is fully up now, and the city of Uruk is starting to stretch in earnest. The markets are busy with their trade of copper, textiles, and the occasional donkey haggling. You hear the clink of metal tools being sharpened, the creak of carts moving slowly over cobblestones, and the general murmur of life that somehow manages to be both noisy and tranquil at the same time. But none of this concerns you right now. You're still lost in thought, trying to digest the immensity of the world you've just entered. The hum of the city fades as you find yourself wandering through quieter lanes. where the people move with the same rhythm as the temples. There's something peaceful here, something oddly reassuring about the fact that, in a place like this, counting was everything. You think about the scribes again, hunched over their tablets, shaping the future with every stroke. The idea of recording events, ideas, and the simplest of transactions seems so crucial, so deeply tied to the human need for certainty. And then your mind drifts back to the sheep. Because if there's one thing that could make this whole situation even more absurd, it's the sheep. You haven't quite figured out why they're so important in all this. They seem to be everywhere. In the scribes' notebooks, in the grain tally, in prayers, even in the myths. But how did they fit into this world of numbers? It turns out, sheep were at the heart of Mesopotamian economy. A little mainstream fact for you. Sheep were a critical part of the diet, economy, and religious practices. The wool, the milk, the meat, it all counted. That's why, when the Mesopotamians set out to measure everything in sight, they made sure to include the sheep in their calculations. It wasn't just about sheep for food either. No, these sheep were also part of something bigger. Sheep were the living proof that the land was fertile, that the gods were pleased, that you were doing things the right way. And here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamian sheep were so valuable that some of them were essentially like bank accounts on four legs. They were bred for sacrifice, or as a living currency, no kidding. People would give a sheep in tribute, exchange it for favor, or even use it as collateral for loans. If a farmer borrowed grain and couldn't pay it back in kind, he might pay back the debt in sheep. It was an ancient form of what we'd call collateralized debt. Historians still argue whether this practice was more a matter of faith or of survival. It's hard to say. One thing's for sure, those sheep had a lot of responsibility. Now, as you wander through the city, passing vendors, shouting over one another, and the hum of merchants haggling over prices, you start to get a sense of how the math worked itself into every fiber of this place. The numbers, the sheep, the scribes, and the temple workers, they were all part of an unspoken order. The whole thing was like a giant, well-oiled machine, but one that required constant maintenance. Every transaction mattered, and every misstep could lead to a little bit of chaos. For now, though, you're left to reflect on the quiet power of the number. It's strange how something as simple as counting sheep could, in its own way, keep an entire civilization running smoothly. The heat of the sun is rising now. People are slowly retreating to their cool homes, and the scent of baked bread and roasted meat starts to waft down the streets. You turn a corner and spot a small, shaded courtyard. A few children are playing with clay figures in the dirt, making pretend sheep and counting them out loud, giggling as they do so. They may not know it yet, but they're practicing the very skills that will one day help them keep their families fed and their fields fertile. You pause for a moment to watch them and you wonder, Are they dreaming of sheep too? Perhaps they'll sleep as soundly as the farmers who counted sheep before them, lulled into a sense of peace by the rhythm of numbers, by the belief that everything is accounted for, that the world, chaotic as it may seem, is somehow still in balance. The image stays with you as you continue your walk through the city. The day has fully unfolded now, but the quiet whisper of those numbers stays in your mind, guiding you like a quiet lullaby. And you realize something as you pass another shop selling barley cakes. It's not the sheep themselves that make the difference. It's the counting of them, the numbers, the certainty. That's what makes all the difference. Maybe it's why you're starting to feel drowsy again. You're still drifting, almost as if the rhythm of the counting, of the daily transactions, and the steady march of time has finally found a way into your bones. The quiet hum of life in this ancient place starts to blend together. Sheep, scribes, the constant flow of barley, and the sound of water rushing from the Euphrates. It's all becoming one big, steady, quiet loop. The world is waking up around you, but it's not loud. It's peaceful, even in its hustle. The streets aren't flooded with noise. Instead, it's a gentle chorus, someone singing a lullaby to a child, the scraping of sandals against dusty stone, the faint sound of reeds being sharpened by a scribe who's probably too tired to care about the noises he's making. You've spent all this time thinking about the mechanics of the world, the sheep, the scribes, the numbers, and yet, in the quiet moments, you can almost feel that deep, unspoken longing that comes with life in this ancient world. It's a longing to understand, to organize, to bring order out of chaos. And as you wander through the streets, a thought crosses your mind. What about the people behind the numbers? We've spent so much time talking about clay tablets and barley rations. But what did it feel like to live under this constant surveillance of your every transaction? Every grain counted, every sheep watched. Was there room to breathe? To sleep? You pause and consider it. The concept of sleep in ancient Mesopotamia was closely tied to this idea of order. Sleep wasn't just a biological function, it was a cosmic act. The gods slept, the kings slept, the workers slept. But the sleep that came after counting, it wasn't easy. The pressures of constant measurement and the worry about whether you'd paid enough tribute to the gods for a good harvest, the weight of it all had to rest on someone's shoulders. Speaking of gods, here's your mainstream fact. The Mesopotamians had gods for everything. Gods of sleep, gods of barley, gods of sheep. In fact, one of the most significant deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon was Ninsun, the goddess of dreams. She was the mother of Gilgamesh, the famous king, and was believed to offer protection to those seeking rest from their hard labor. Her domain was sleep, and it was said that her blessings could guide dreams into prophetic visions. But here's your quirky tidbit. It wasn't just the gods that got involved in sleep. The Mesopotamians also had specialized sleep priests. Yes, priests dedicated to ensuring that people would sleep well. If you couldn't sleep, or if your dreams were troubling, you could go to one of these sleep priests who would interpret your dreams and offer you rituals to ensure peaceful rest. Historians still argue about the true power these priests held. Were they actual healers? Or were they just good at making people feel better through their rituals? You find yourself thinking about sleep more and more as you walk. It's not something people did just to rest, was it? There was something spiritual about it. Something essential about counting those sheep to fall asleep. The act of counting itself wasn't just a way to pass time. It was a connection between the person, the land, and the gods. Maybe sleep was the one thing in Mesopotamia that wasn't measured. Maybe, for a few moments, everything was allowed to fall into place. You pass a temple, the massive stone walls, standing like silent sentinels in the heat of the day. Inside, the air is thick with incense, the hum of chants rising from deep within the sacred chambers. The priests are busy with their offerings, their faces serious. It's a place of ritual and sacrifice. But for all the power and mystery of the gods they worship, you can't help but wonder if, even here, they counted the sheep. And as you move past the temple, you find a quiet space beneath a tree, a place of shade. You sit, letting the weight of the day settle on your shoulders. The city hums gently around you, a distant memory of chaos that never fully arrives. You close your eyes for just a moment, and for the first time in this journey, the counting stops. You let yourself breathe. Let your mind wander in the soft rhythm of the present. The simple truth of it is this: counting those sheep was never just about counting sheep. It was about knowing that the world was, in some small way, ordered. It was about finding peace in the repetitive, the familiar. And as you begin to drift into a kind of half-dream, half-wakefulness, you think maybe this is what it felt like in ancient Mesopotamia. To count the sheep, to measure the grain, to find some kind of comfort in the act of watching the world unfold at a slow, steady pace. And that, you realize, is enough, because in this moment, there is peace. The world around you seems to slow down in the most pleasant way. The distant hum of the marketplace has softened, replaced now by the rhythmic chirping of insects in the shaded courtyards. You stretch your legs out and let your eyes half close, letting the warmth of the afternoon lull you into a state of quiet contemplation. There's something so peaceful about the way time moves here. It's not hurried. The world flows gently forward, as if measured out, just like those sheep you've been thinking about. But as your mind drifts further into that soft haze, you start to wonder, what was it like to be part of that daily rhythm? To be surrounded by such an unyielding structure of numbers, to constantly feel the weight of measurement on your shoulders. You've spent so much time considering how the people of ancient Mesopotamia counted sheep, counted grain, counted everything in sight. But now, you begin to wonder about the uncountable things. What did they dream about? What did they feel when they went to sleep? Because it wasn't just the sheep and the barley they had to worry about. It was everything. There was the ever-present threat of invasion from neighboring peoples, the constant vigilance of farming and keeping track of harvests, and the looming expectations of the gods to remain in their good graces. Every day, there were sacrifices, prayers, offerings made to ensure that all would be well. And in that swirl of tasks and rituals, when did anyone have the time to not count? And yet, there was sleep. You feel the pull of it now, don't you? The deep, soft weight of rest that invites you to forget the world for a while. Maybe sleep wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was a moment of release from the rigid structures of daily life. Historians still argue whether ancient Mesopotamians had any concept of a mental escape in their sleep, or if it was simply another phase of their well-ordered existence. You'd have to ask the sleep priests about that. As strange as it sounds, the sleep priests might have been the only ones who truly understood the fragile balance between rest and work. The ones who could look at you with a serene gaze and say, "Tonight, you will sleep deeply." Could they? Could a simple ritual really calm the ever-present weight of living under constant surveillance and measurement? And speaking of rituals, let's take a look at one of the more peculiar aspects of Mesopotamian sleep customs, the so-called sleep incantations. These were prayers or chants recited before sleep, designed to ensure peaceful dreams and ward off nightmares. People would kneel by their beds and speak in a soft, melodic tone, calling on the gods to guide them into restful slumber. The strange part, however, was the focus on dreams. You'd think people would pray for restful sleep, but in fact, the Mesopotamians prayed for meaningful dreams, dreams with divine messages. You can almost imagine someone kneeling before their bed, saying, "Please, dear gods, send me a dream that will tell me whether or not I'll be prosperous in the coming year, or if my sheep will survive the next season." They didn't just want peace. They wanted answers. You also remember the idea of the dream books, collections of dream interpretations that were considered invaluable guides in ancient Mesopotamia. If you had a dream, say, about a particular animal or about a person speaking in riddles, these books would tell you exactly what that dream meant. The presence of these books tells us a lot about the ancient world's obsession with control. Dreams were just another thing to be measured, understood, and deciphered. In fact, dream interpretation was a formalized practice, a branch of knowledge all its own. Now, that's a quirky tidbit for you. Imagine being one of those scribes, meticulously writing down the meanings of sheep dreams. If one dreams of a fat Ewe with 3 lambs, prosperity is near. Or, if one dreams of a lamb lost in the wilderness, disaster will strike. Pretty wild, right? It's funny how dreams, something so intangible, could be as closely guarded as any material possession. And even though those scribes spent all day tallying, counting, and organizing the tangible world, they also devoted their time to ensuring that people's dreams were just as structured and understood. There's a certain paradox in that, isn't there? The very thing meant to escape the rules was itself brought into the fold of order. And here you are now, in a world full of numbers and dreams, where the counting never really stops, even in sleep. It's almost as if the people of Mesopotamia believed that if they could control their dreams, if they could find peace in their sleep, then maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world would follow suit. Perhaps, in the act of counting sheep, they were counting on the promise that things would always fall into place, that the gods would bless them with the peace they longed for. As the day wears on, the air around you shifts, and the quiet of the city feels even more pronounced. The temple bells ring softly, signaling the passage of time, and you feel the familiar lull of sleep beckoning you. But before you slip away, you think back to those sheep again, the humble animals that somehow played such a pivotal role in shaping the entire fabric of Mesopotamian life. You wonder if, as people counted sheep to sleep, they found comfort in knowing that they were at least part of something bigger, part of a world that was, for all its complexities, carefully watched over. For now, though, you decide to let go. You let your thoughts dissolve into the quiet pulse of the world, as soft as the sleep that comes after a long day's counting. The light fades from the sky, and the peaceful world around you seems to settle even more. The hum of the city softens to a near whisper as the first stars appear in the sky, dotting the darkness like scattered jewels. The night is here, and with it, the silence of the past blends into the present. You feel as though you've been living in a story that spans centuries, where the rhythm of counting and resting never quite stops. But what was it like to end a day in Mesopotamia? After a long day of working the fields, managing the flocks, or attending to the royal court's endless demands, how did the people find their peace? How did they draw the line between the measurable and the intangible? You can almost hear the faint sounds of the workers and traders winding down their busy days, the streets filling with the quiet murmur of conversations in every corner. The markets are now calm, the vendors packing away their wares. It's strange to think that there was no weekend back then, no respite from the constant demands of work. The world's rhythm didn't stop, and neither did the counting. Yet, there was one thing that could bring some sense of pause: the nightly rituals. It wasn't just about going to sleep. It was about how you went to sleep. After all, the day had been filled with so many rituals, those endless prayers to the gods, those offerings of barley and sheep, those dreams carefully interpreted and catalogued. Sleep had to be just as meaningful, just as ritualistic. And here's a mainstream fact that will make you pause. The concept of sleeping in didn't exist in ancient Mesopotamia. As strange as it sounds, there were no lazy mornings here. People woke up early as the sun rose to begin another day of labor. But before they could begin, they needed to ensure they were properly rested. And so, the evening rituals became incredibly important. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals were purely spiritual practices or if they were also designed to prepare the body for the kind of rigorous work that would begin at dawn. Regardless, one thing is clear. Sleep was far more than just a biological need. It was a gateway to another world. After a long day of counting and calculating, many people would kneel at their beds, often with a small offering of fruit or bread. They would whisper prayers, invoking the god Nansen, the goddess of dreams, to grant them peaceful sleep and prophetic dreams. The idea was that sleep wasn't just about rest, but also about communion with the divine. Could it be that, while the Mesopotamians worked tirelessly to measure the tangible world, they also sought to understand the invisible world through their dreams? There were even special rituals designed to encourage a deeper connection to the gods. One such ritual involved placing a small figurine of a sheep beside the bed, a reminder of both the sheep that brought prosperity and the sacred act of counting them to sleep. The figurine symbolized the connection between the physical and the spiritual, the balance of earthly duties and divine favor. Even though sheep were primarily a means of survival in this quiet moment of sleep, they became a symbol of comfort, of care, and of continuity. Now, as for a quirky tidbit, have you ever wondered what the actual sleeping arrangements were like in ancient Mesopotamia? You've heard of grand palaces, right? Well, the sleeping spaces for common people were often very simple. Most people slept on reed mats spread out on the floor, sometimes with a pillow made from a soft clay or stone headrest. And if you were a priest or an official, you might have a wooden bed with cushions, though nothing like the grand four-poster beds you might be imagining. But it wasn't the beds that mattered. It was the rituals surrounding them. Historians still argue whether these rituals actually made people sleep better, or if they just helped them feel more at peace. Maybe it wasn't about getting the deepest sleep, but about having the most meaningful sleep. After all, this was a culture that saw life as a delicate balance between the material and the divine. You could measure your barley, calculate your grain, and count your sheep. But when it came time to sleep, the gods had their say. And that, perhaps, was the ultimate balance. As you drift into that quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, you begin to realize that it's not so much about the physical act of counting sheep. It's about the feeling of being connected to something bigger than yourself, something ancient. You're not just counting for the sake of counting. You're part of a grand cycle, a cosmic rhythm that goes back thousands of years. The ritual of counting, the prayer before sleep, the dreams that came afterward, it all formed a larger tapestry, a way to calm the mind and find peace. Maybe it wasn't so different from what you do now. You count the days, the hours, the moments. And in those small acts, you find some sort of order. In the end, that's all anyone really wants, to find a little peace in the chaos of life. You think about the people of Mesopotamia as you start to feel your own eyelids grow heavier. How did they rest, knowing the world would be waiting for them again at dawn? And how did they dream, knowing that those dreams could shape their future? You're not sure, but you do know this. There was something deeply sacred about it. The act of sleep, the act of dreaming, was something they guarded carefully, not just as a physical necessity, but as a way to commune with the divine. Now, as you settle into the quiet of the night, you can almost hear the distant bleating of sheep, counting their way into the slumber of another night. And perhaps, just like them, you can let go of the world for a little while, knowing that in the morning there will be a new cycle to begin. The night deepens, and everything seems to slow to a near halt. There's a stillness that comes with the closing hours of the day, as if the entire world is holding its breath before the next cycle begins. You can feel the weight of time pressing gently against your chest. The sheep, the counting, the dreams, they are all part of a much bigger, much slower clock ticking quietly in the background. As you drift through the quiet of your thoughts, you begin to wonder about the sheer complexity of life in ancient Mesopotamia. They didn't have the luxury of rushing from task to task like we do today, always connected, always on the move. No, they lived in a world where the very structure of time itself was sacred. Even the way they slept was part of that grand design. Imagine the people kneeling before their beds after a long day, offering prayers not just to ensure a good night's sleep, but to secure a future. They needed those dreams to be meaningful, to give them signs and insights that would guide them through the days ahead. Historians still argue whether these dreams were believed to be purely divine in nature, or if they were simply a product of the mind's need to process the day's experiences. Perhaps it was a little bit of both. Dreams in the ancient world weren't just fleeting images. They were tools of communication, a sacred language between the earthly and the divine. They were the bridge between a hard, physical day and the soft, mysterious world of sleep. Think about it. The ancient Mesopotamians didn't have Google to search for the meaning of their dreams. They didn't have dream journals filled with modern psychological interpretations. Instead, they had priestly guides, men and women whose job it was to help them make sense of the nighttime visions that would come after a day filled with numbers and rituals. These guides weren't just scribes. They were spiritual intermediaries, the ones who could tell you what your dreams meant. In fact, these guides would often interpret dreams by using a set of common symbols. If you dreamt of a well, it was a sign of prosperity. A sheep in a dream? That meant security and abundance. A lion? Courage or a threat from an enemy. It's fascinating how much these dream symbols reflected the lives of the people, their everyday concerns, their hopes for prosperity, and their constant struggle to maintain control over their uncertain world. But here's the strange part. Not all dreams were seen as good omens. There were plenty of bad dreams too, and those, of course, had their own interpretations. If you dreamt of something falling apart, like a broken jar, it could be a warning of imminent misfortune. If you dreamt of an enemy approaching, it was a clear sign that you needed to be ready for conflict. These dreams were seen as portents, messages from the gods about the things yet to come. The act of interpreting these dreams was an art form in itself. The scribes didn't just jot down their thoughts about your dreams, they analyzed them, consulted their vast libraries of dream manuals, and compared your dream to others who had come before you. In some ways, the ancient world's approach to dreams seems almost like the early version of modern-day therapy, a way to take your internal experiences and give them a structure, a meaning, a purpose. And let's not forget the more personal side of sleep. Beyond the dream rituals and religious practices, there were, naturally, more private moments that accompanied the transition from waking to sleeping. What was it like to lie down after a long day of work, knowing that you'd have to get up before the sun and do it all over again? The Mesopotamians didn't have comfortable foam mattresses or soft pillows like we do. They had reed mats, sometimes with a simple pillow or headrest made from stone or clay. But those were luxury items. It makes you appreciate the modern bed, doesn't it? You almost can't imagine having to sleep on something as basic as a mat. But back then, it was the norm, and even though the physical comforts of sleep were lacking, the emotional and spiritual elements of rest were highly valued. That's what makes the ancient world's sleep rituals so fascinating. They didn't just count sheep for the sake of counting. They were counting on a better future. They were counting on the gods to intervene, to offer guidance, and to provide safety in a world that was anything but predictable. As you think back to those nightly rituals, it strikes you how much effort went into the simple act of sleeping. While modern society often views sleep as a necessary evil, something we must do in order to function the next day, the ancient Mesopotamians saw it as a sacred experience. They counted sheep, they said their prayers, they offered their sacrifices, all to ensure that they were granted the peace and rest needed to face the day ahead. Of course, there were still those days when sleep just didn't come, when the worries of the world, the invasions, the taxes, the gods, the harvests, everything that had been counted and measured during the day, kept you wide awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling of your reed hut. In those moments, sleep seemed like an unattainable luxury, a brief escape that remained just out of reach. But maybe, just maybe, that's when you needed the dreams most. They were the balm for a world that never quite stopped moving. The dreams, no matter how unsettling or strange, were the moments when you could finally find peace. And as you lie here now, drifting off into that same world of sleep. You can almost feel that connection to the past. The ancient Mesopotamians, like you, needed rest. They needed to forget the struggles of the day, to close their eyes, and to trust in something greater than themselves. Whether it was the sheep, the gods, or the rhythm of the seasons, they had faith that they would wake up the next day to start it all over again, to count the sheep once more. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The way something as simple as sleep becomes intertwined with the grander patterns of life. The sheep, the counting, the rituals, all of it was part of an endless cycle. A cycle that you, too, are now part of as you slip further into the comfort of your own dreams. The silence of the night grows deeper still, wrapping the world in its cool embrace. You're nestled comfortably now, floating gently through time and space, carried by the rhythmic pulse of sleep itself. And in the quiet, you begin to realize that there's more to sleep than just the moment of rest. It's a continuation of everything that came before it. The work, the rituals, the counting, the dreams, they all tie together, weaving a tapestry that spans centuries. As your thoughts drift to the ancient world, you wonder what those final moments of consciousness were like for the people of Mesopotamia. After the sheep were counted, after the prayers were whispered, after the dreams were interpreted, what did they experience in that space between wakefulness and sleep? Was it a peaceful surrender into the night? Or was it a time of reflection, a brief moment of quiet before the cycle began anew? For them, sleep wasn't just the end of the day. It was the bridge to the unknown. In a world full of uncertainty, the dream realm was a place where answers might be found, where the gods might reveal hidden truths. Perhaps they didn't sleep to forget, as we often do today. Instead, they slept to remember, to connect with something greater, something eternal. And in that, there was peace. You may find yourself wondering if we, too, still need that same connection to the unknown. In today's world, we often don't have the luxury of believing that our dreams are messages from the divine. We're too busy, too distracted, too rooted in the tangible, in the measurable. But even in our modern lives, there are moments when we seek solace, when we long for a sense of connection to something beyond ourselves. Perhaps, deep down, we still long for the peace that the ancient Mesopotamians found in their dreams. Historians still argue whether these spiritual practices were born purely out of necessity, a way to cope with the hardships of ancient life, or if they were truly a reflection of a deeply held belief in the power of dreams and divine intervention. What's clear, however, is that the act of sleep was as sacred to them as the act of living. And as you rest here now, you can't help but think that in many ways, their legacy continues today. The act of closing your eyes, of surrendering to the unknown, is still a deeply human experience. The world around you is quiet now. The only sounds the soft, rhythmic breathing of your own body. But as you feel yourself drifting closer to sleep, you can almost hear the distant bleating of sheep once more. The ancient Mesopotamians are with you in the peace of this quiet moment, where the line between the known and the unknown begins to blur. They, too, counted sheep, whispered prayers, and sought solace in the mysteries of the night. And in this shared human experience, you realize that, despite the centuries that separate you, you are not so different after all. The dreams will come, just as they always have. They may not be prophetic, and they may not come with divine guidance, but they will be your own. And just like those who came before you will close your eyes and trust that tomorrow will arrive with its own set of challenges and mysteries. But for now, the only thing that matters is the peace of the present moment, the quiet space between wakefulness and sleep. Now, as the last traces of consciousness begin to fade, you can let go. You can surrender to the night, just as the Mesopotamians did, counting their sheep, seeking their dreams, and finding peace in the rhythm of life. The cycle continues, just as it always has, and you, too, are a part of it. You can feel your body relax, sinking deeper into the soft embrace of sleep. And as you drift further into the dream world, you find that the questions and mysteries of the day seem distant now, faded away. There is only peace, only rest. The sheep are counted, the prayers have been said, and now you can let the divine, or whatever it is you choose to call it, take care of the rest. So go ahead, close your eyes, let the world slip away, and when you wake, the sun will rise, just as it always has, bringing with it a new day, a new chance to count, to measure, and to dream once again. End of script. Sweet dreams.